Building in public.
High five.
Welcome to Friday, the end of the first week of the rebrand. Oh, and Jen is here.
Yay.
So Jen, she still refers to this as lunch break, and I sometimes do too. You know, when she primes me on it, I'm trying to make sure that internally we have kind of our rebrand down. But she actually had some interesting kind of observations about how, she had some interesting observation about how she's building Renaissance Collective and a certain type of idea that she and the community can help, with. So I said, why don't you come on Building in Public and let's discuss it.
Yay. Yeah.
So here she is. I'm going to invite Jen up.
Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Hey, welcome.
Thanks.
I was just telling Mishti how we are almost completed with our rebrand from lunch break to Building in Public.
You and I sometimes every time I call it lunch break. I'm like, who's on lunch break today? And he's like, we're no longer lunch break. Lunch break doesn't exist. I'm like, oh, shut up. You and I both know what we're talking about.
Yeah. I still call it lunch break.
Huh?
I still call it lunch break too. I have my oatmeal.
Yeah.
I got my kombucha.
And Jen hopefully has an actual lunch.
No, not yet. I just got back from a run.
Oh, nice. It looks really nice out there.
It's pretty beautiful. Yeah. So what are we talking about today?
So yeah, I think you already know the concept behind Building in Public, but the core idea is we invite people on and we kind of talk about either things they are building or interested in building, and kind of working with raw new early ideas and trying to help shape and mold and form them into something that's better than when they came. The hope. So we end up talking about Renaissance Collective a lot on here because it oftentimes has some relevance to kind of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of tangential relationships. And then I think just a little bit ago, you were telling me, outside of the context of the show, you were telling me about some ideas you had around how to take the kind of the people and feedback process that flows through the community and use it to sort of empower founders with some more data to help them become better at kind of pitching startup in different contexts. So I wonder if you want to sort of lay out some of the core idea and we can kind of use that as a seed to start going.
Yeah. I mean, everyone talks about how early stage startups have trouble hiring. So like you've just raised a fresh round of funding. You're like, oh, I can hire anybody. I have lots of roles open. Like we're growing like crazy. Everybody wants to join something early. But actually it's a tough sell for smart, talented, experienced people to take the risk of joining something early before it actually has a brand if they don't know people. So what we see a lot in Renaissance Collective is people asking people like, posting and help, or open roles or something like, hey, I heard of this startup. I'm looking at this role. What do you guys think of this? Because nobody's heard of these early stage startups, or we see angel investors posting, hey, my portfolio company is hiring, and there's a lot of information that goes around. People are like, oh yeah, I know this team. I know this founder, like DM me, and people share that information pretty widely, or they'll be like, I interviewed with these people. Like, let me tell you about them, DM me, and so we see a lot of that information flowing through good people networks. And the problem is like founders don't get to hear what talented people are saying about them. So sometimes I will play the role of facilitator, if I have that relationship with a founder, I'll email them and be like, hey, like we tried sharing this role, but like here's what the community says, you know. And it'll be things like, you know, that pitch didn't really land with me because like they want to be the next Uber for X or the next Stripe for Y, you know. And talent is like, you know, like that doesn't, I don't even know what that means. Like, why do I want to join the next Stripe for X? Why don't I just join Stripe? You know, like, or they'll be like, you know, that role title sounds very senior, but I took a look at the responsibilities and it sounds like a glorified EA, you know. And so this is some of the feedback we're getting from people, and that would be useful for founders to know. And yet, like, there is no good way for talented people to give that feedback to founders, but it actually hurts founders to like have a bad pitch to startup talent, because that information just circulates. And so is there a way to like have a pitch session that focuses on what talent is looking for? And I think that's distinct from what investors are looking for. Talent doesn't want to hear like, this is $1 trillion opportunity. You know, they're like, okay, cool. Like, what are my roles? What are my responsibilities? How am I going to grow in this role? Who will I be working with? What's my leverage in the company? What's the growth trajectory here look like? You know, like, what's the opportunity for me to grow? What's the title? You know, is the comp like appropriate for the titling? You know, who is my manager? Do I respect them? You know, you look for a totally different set of things when you are actually thinking about spending all your time building that thing.
So is this like an extension of the investor pitch, or is it like a totally different, like it's a different framing, different kind of starting than maybe the investor pitch?
I think for it to be most helpful, it would be like, founders, come pitch us like a role that's really important for you to hire for right now. Like, give us the, you know, like even before you write up a JD, like give us the title, like why this role is so important, what they're going to be working on, the growth trajectory for the talent, you know, what you're thinking of titling it. You know, it's competitive. Top talent is scarce. And I think that's the scarce thing, you know? And so you're competing for like really good people's time and attention. You should nail that pitch.
Right. Now, I know that you had run, it's probably not well known yet, but I know you had run the Society of Artificers, was like a community around robotics and AI. And then as an offshoot of that, you ran Robotics Showcase, which had some flavors of this idea where you were having, you know, founders and creators of companies pitch on stage, and then you'd assembled sort of an audience of potentially interested talent. So I wonder, like, from that process, did you learn anything that informs this, or did you have that feedback tightly coupled? Did people change their process? What kinds of things did you learn in that experience?
Zipline did a great job. Everybody was sold on Zipline, and people, you know, people who came to that event, even if they weren't looking for a job, they were like, they left that event being like, friends, you got to apply to Zipline. You know, people are mission driven. And so like, as in, people want to have impact in the world. Great talent like wants to have impact in the world. And so you need to sell the impact that company will have, not in terms of like, here's the, like, you know, $1 trillion opportunity, but like, why does this make a difference in the world? You know? And so mission driven things where people are like, you know, this is saving lives. Like, we are bringing medical supplies places that, you know, where there's no road access, you know, that story lands very well for talent, you know. The other thing we learned was that a lot of people have trouble hiring technical talent. So like, this was pitched toward engineers, this robotic showcase, and engineers love to work on like thorny problems. Like, they want that problem to be intrinsically interesting. And so if we're pitching to like technical talent, like, we structured that pitch event so that the founders would tell us about 2 interesting technical problems, you know? And so it depends on what your audience is, you know, like, really gets motivated by.
So I think you were suggesting that, at least the thing I heard, maybe I'm putting too many of my own imaginary thoughts in it, but was the thing you had in mind something similar to that robotic showcase structure, or
Yeah.
is it?
It is, yes, for sure. We have a job transition support circle because at any given time, there's probably like 20 people in Renaissance Collective who are like open to new opportunities, not, not even necessarily aggressively seeking, but like open for the right thing, and thinking about like creating that like DMZ that like allows founders to pitch and like get feedback on their pitch. So like, Mishti, like you, Charles, Nadia, like these are people that, startups would want to hire, but what is compelling to them? And then coming up with like a scorecard, like were you sold by the mission? Like what, like more specific criteria on like what talent cares about and how you did.
Right. So it sounds like the like mission is one of the things that really drives people, or kind of is attractive, as a leading point, as opposed to maybe kind of market size. It sounds like is sort of maybe an investor focused one. Are there other framings, like are there certain people? It sounds like kind of in the engineer kind of technical talent capacity, understanding deeper about the technical challenges, maybe a leading point, or maybe follow up to mission. Are there other kind of framings, whether they're for specific type of talent or kind of broadly?
I think that one of the things that motivates people, especially for early stage startups, is what's the team composition? Like how are you talking about your team? Like a lot of people say like the founders were X Stripe, X, Uber or whatever. And those carry connotations. Like those brands have, have associations for people. And then
how do people think? Do they imagine that like some of the culture of those companies may transfer? Is that sort of?
Yeah, they do think that, and they also look for like one of the things that I hear Charles talk about is I don't know, like they look for signals on whether this person is credible as a builder, and so they're like, has this person founded a company before? Is this the first time ever? Like, how did they come up with this idea? Do they deeply understand the problem? Like, why do they care about this problem? So in that sense, there's like some overlap with investors, but it's kind of like looking for credibility in leadership. An important aspect of it. Like, does this leaders seem appropriate for pursuing this opportunity? Do I have signal that they know how to build? Like, where did they come from? Did they come from, X Accelerator or, Y Combinator or South Park Commons? Like, those carry signals for talent too, like what networks people are part of and which networks will I be associated with now that, if I were to join this.
Right. Are there certain themes that seem to come up again and again from certain networks? Like, are people coming from Uber likely to do transactional marketplaces, or do you think that you see people maybe leave Uber and do something, I don't know, like healthcare or some sort of further afield area, does talent, is talent okay with that kind of leap, or would talent be more excited about kind of, a transactional marketplace from an ex-Uber person? Like, is it more just like Uber was good and well run, or is it sort of like the context of what they were doing at Uber translates well to discovering this new opportunity?
I think that they look for signal in like, okay, so here's the skills you picked up at Uber, are you doing a marketplace? Like the like, association people make in their minds is this person was at Uber. They must have learned a lot about art marketplaces. So, are they taking that and transferring, that knowledge into building some other marketplace business, so like, anyhow, I think the team dynamics and like the experience of the founders matters a lot to, early hires.
Yeah, I wonder how to communicate, like how you could communicate some of the team dynamics best? Because that seems like something that's so important, but you can't, I mean, everyone's going to say we have a great team and a great culture, but how do you actually prove that to an audience of potential recruits?
Yeah.
And some of it is just like you can kind of tell when people talk, you get a sense for who they are. But beyond that, particularly like within sub teams and maybe like 2 or 3 people who work closely together who are hiring for a role within their team, I don't know what kind of things would demonstrate like, is this a culture that actually is good for my personal learning opportunities and stuff? That's the kind of stuff that investors wouldn't know about or necessarily even like worry to care about that much, but is very important to recruits.
Yeah, totally. I'm not really sure what a pitch would look like that would demonstrate that you have a good team and that the team is going to be invested in your growth, but that's that's one of the things that early hires look for. Yeah.
It almost seems like, if you had the opportunity to just like hear from somebody and kind of see how they talk about it a little bit extemporaneously, that might help, understand some amount of depth of like how genuine and authentic is this versus like if you see a job posting on like lever.co or whatever, you're like, I don't know, okay, rock stars, yada yada, whatever. Like, how do you? Many of those look kind of the same. It's really hard to really understand the people.
Yep, totally. The other thing people look for too, a signal, especially women, is like other women on the team. We'll be like, I'm not into this. It's a bro culture. That's another thing that matters. Do you
think there are strong signals that get kind of established, or that people are trying to shape? Like, what would be sort of the cultures that you think people are trying to shape narrative around to sort of express as part of a company today? Like you mentioned, mission driven as being kind of one. Are there other aspects around sort of how they think about building culture? Kind of, because a new company doesn't, kind of definitionally doesn't have a lot of culture. Yeah, they're like establishing it with the first, dozen or a couple dozen people.
Yeah. I don't think, I've always advised people to like, if they're going to go into a company early, to do a project first. That's like really the best way to understand the culture. And by culture, we really mean like, how are decisions made? Who's included in the decision making? How do things get communicated? How often like people communicate with each other, people often like put onboarding now in part of like, the culture, like who's responsible for that? How is onboarding delivered? Is it through written materials? Is it through, one-on-ones that are set up for you? Is it pretty self-directed? How do you learn about like what the team's doing and where you fit in? Just like much more challenging virtually. But people care about the team, the culture. They also care a lot about the role title, even though like you shouldn't care as much about the role title. There's like some indication of how the startup will value you given the title. And also like how they think about org building. And so the role title is actually loaded, with implications. Like people are like, wait, they're going to give me a COO title, like, and they're a 3-person team or whatever, they're signaling in that, like how you think about building your org in the future, given the titles you're willing to give early hires. And it's got to be like commensurate with like, talent, but not like overinflated. Like, people are enough to see overinflation in titles as like, bait, but not that meaningful.
That's what I was going to ask. So it sounds like when companies do kind of get into the title inflation stuff, that good talent generally knows how to select out of that situation?
Yeah.
Has good instincts around that?
Some, yeah.
Because it seems like a hard one. I mean, you're like, really? Like, that sounds exciting and, very senior. And then it seems like it could sort of pull on it could pique interest in a way that might not be healthy for either party.
Right. Totally. And I've seen it I've seen people like double click on things like, wait, this small team is hiring a VP of product or a head of product. Like, do they even know what they're building? The other big thing is like product market fit. Every founder, like after they close a round of financing, will tell people, yeah, we've got product market fit, and like then, early hires are super disappointed when they get into a company and they realize there just isn't as much traction as they were told to believe, and so like what's the line of questioning for to actually drill down on whether the company has actually found product market fit, or whether you're going to be wandering around with the founder in the dark for to try to scramble to find it.
Yep. That's a good topic, because I think it comes up very frequently with the work you do at Renaissance Collective. And
so often people are so crushed when they're like, I thought this startup said they had product market fit. How do I get out of this now?
Right. And I think, there's good opportunities across the spectrum of pre-product market fit as well as post-product market fit. But I think if everybody comes to a relationship with clear understanding, it's better than if, one party thinks you're in product market fit and the other thinks you're not. I think it's, I think that can be challenging. So, I wonder, do you have already a prescribed line of questioning that you can advise somebody to go down? Or have you found any paths or patterns yet that seem to show up while you want to prosecute that?
We ask about what kind of chaos is in the company. I mean, I don't really know how people are asking the question when they present it, but often when somebody tells me that they don't think there's product market fit, I'm like, does it feel like good chaos or bad chaos? Are people really scrambly and not knowing, what to do next? Is there just no drive towards the right direction? Or is it good chaos, which feels like there's so much demand for something that that there's just too much to do?
Right. Yeah. So I think that good chaos does sound like the right thing to filter for. I wonder if it can be, if chaos can be confused for good chaos, because let's say something doesn't have product market fit, but they raised a lot of capital and they're hiring a lot. So does that end up, how do you distill that that's chaos, but it's not good? Because it looks like, now there's this VP of ops and customer service, and there's all these people that have fancy titles and lots of hiring going on, which is kind of, I'd say, a result of the fact that lots of capital was raised, sometimes more than. And so how do you sort of take that situation? Let's say you're considering joining as employee number 30, and there's a bunch of senior leadership and teams getting built. How do you, do you talk to your hiring manager? Do you try to talk to, founder, CEO type? How do you sort of process that to ensure that you are coming to the same conclusions that they are?
Right. Not sure.
It seems like the hiring manager would be a good maybe starting point for that conversation. Hey, looks like there's a lot going on here. Every week new people are getting hired and there's stuff going on. What how do you distill, what's the core of what is working and what are the next challenges to unlock the next type of working? Because I think even a post product market fit company has challenges to unlock and move towards something better or bigger, probably. Right? Imagine you mentioned Stripe. So let's imagine Stripe, Stripe day 90 into the thing, they've got a little bit of a little bit of API code you can put into a website and host payments, but all the customers are kind of mom and pop, onesie twosie. There's no real volume. These things are all like kind of hack projects, more or less, right? And do you call that product market fit, or are you like, no, well, we have to see a certain number of dollars flowing through transactions in the system, aggregate across it to really claim product market fit? Or we have to have like so many people signed up asking to use the API that we haven't even been able to like onboard them properly. We don't have the right documentation. Like, because what does that feel like? Because I think in a sense, like once, I guess, I don't know, Stripe is what they now must, I think they close to Amazon or Apple, or they have like, plenty of huge e-commerce behemoths using them. And so it's obviously, product market fit there, but like, what does the early one look like? Because it's not, I think hiring people is, hiring lots of people is not enough of a signal. It's like maybe indication, but it's not conclusive, because it's like, okay, if you can raise a lot of capital, you can hire a lot of people. You can raise a lot of capital, independent product market fit, if the idea and vision is exciting. So you might end up with like exciting vision, lots of capital raised, teams starting to be hired, but the underlying thing is not yet really working. And so how do you sort of distill and distinguish that? And I think maybe it starts with,
that's what talent cares about. They're like, what is this going to feel like from day one? Like, does this team know what true north is, and what, like, and how to drive towards it,
Right.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if these sorts of sessions would become like, maybe a company hosts something like this, and then they have 10 super talented, super interested candidates who then they can be like, for like next Monday, you can just kind of shadow us all, especially since everyone's virtual now, just like add them to your Zooms and like let them in your Slack or something. Or, I mean, that kind of stuff is much easier, but it would probably be really high payoff for the company if like 2 of those 10 decide to join or go far into the interview process. Whereas it would probably be a little overwhelming to just open that floodgate to the public and be like, if you're a company like Notion or something, bigger companies that are hiring.
Yeah.
I wonder how if you were like, let's say you're Notion today, how, what would if you were to just like wave magic wand and reinvent the whole hiring process? It sounds like one of the things that would help is getting people more like real experience with the actual people. And today everything's sort of brokered by a website where a job posting lives. And if you can, you're either on site, hanging out with them, having lunch, you're on a Zoom with them, or you're dropping into their sessions. You're sort of like connecting with the people and getting people in a little bit more of like a candid, unpolished, like it's not the perfectly edited copy on the job rec, but it's actually just like real interaction with people. And some of it could be like a project, it sounds like, is one way to do it.
Yep.
And sometimes it could be some other, like I think Robotics Showcase was like an in-person meet and mix kind of mingle session, and that I think that had a lot of promise. So like, are there other kind of areas that, other kind of flavors of how you get the real story out? And what should be the, like, let's say that Notion had, what they must have a dozen or more job recs open at any given time right now, right? Because they're scaling quickly. So what is Notion, like, what, if you were just able to like reinvent Notion's process, like, should they just host like an open house every week, or like what would great look like?
I mean, Notion really cares that you're a Notion super user. Like, I tell people, don't even apply to Notion unless you can show off your Notion links. Don't tell us you love the product unless you can demonstrate that you actually love the product. And I think there are a lot of other companies that are like, show us, that you love us. Like, don't just tell us that you love us, companies care about that, that's really important for them. And especially for like, consumer type companies, where you can actually go use the product, I think like my big thing was like, you know, in talking about this was like really that I think there's a gap where companies aren't aware of how candidates perceive them, or even aware of what candidates are telling their friends about them, you know. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's that information and feedback gap that I think everyone can benefit from knowing, because the companies can get better at like knowing what doesn't sell talent, you know. And so I think that feedback loop needs to be closed, but it's like very difficult because, you know, when somebody like drops out of your interview process or declines the job or you reject them, you don't get to hear what they say about you. You know,
Right.
like, and it's not a one way. It's not a one way street. And like people, even if you don't hire this person, they're going to tell their friends what they know about you and how your process went and what, you know, your pitch was and what your team, what their experience with your team was. And so I think it's like, you know, I've provided feedback to several founders like, hey, this is what people were saying when I shared your role, you know, and that sort of feedback is really hard to get from people because you almost need a disinterested person in the middle to broker that feedback.
And that's kind of the DMZ concept you mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somebody like at Renaissance Collective, you have relationships with talent, you have relationships with companies, but you're kind of neutral. You're not trying to keep talent into companies or vice versa, right? So you sort of can play this role of a demilitarized zone where, like, all the information can flow and you can share it to get it out in a way that's kind of comfortable to people. So
Yeah,
do you imagine
exactly.
there's like, is that something that's like systematizable, or is that going to end up kind of in your inbox, or how do you imagine that might work in the future?
The idea that like you could have a panel of judges, you know, who may not be looking for jobs, you know, but they're exactly the type of talent that you would want to hire, you know. Mishti, I'm sure Charles would love to be on one of these panels. And I think he had like, I don't know, dozens of interviews before he accepted this role, you know, and I think he would be happy to provide feedback to companies along a scorecard of like how was your pitch, you know. Assad too, he went to the work at a startup event, you know, and he just raised the point that like we've raised x million, you know, like that's not that interesting to people.
Right.
Like they don't care about your run rate or like whatnot. They're just like, you know, that's just not that interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. I mean, especially at the early stages, like very few people are joining being like, tell me about your metrics that are so artificially precise. Like everyone knows that this kind of, you're doing it for other reasons.
Yes.
You become a billionaire because of this company's IPO later on, then like great. But like,
exactly.
let's focus on in those sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. The one-on-one rooms were super helpful and interesting, but kind of difficult to manage at times. He's saying what would be probably some of the things we're talking about are the things that would be useful in these rooms. Like tell us about your relationship with your manager, or tell us about what your first month at this company was like, or maybe there could be some structural culture type sessions.
Missy, are you imagining that as part of the kind of broader thing, or as part of the one-on-one session, or?
Oh, okay. Probably it could be one to many, but maybe like one company per a lot of people or something. I really like Jen's like judge panel idea though, because just it provides a format and then those can become deeper conversations, and I'm sure
it's like it's like building in that demilitarized zone that's not my inbox.
Yeah.
Right. I wonder if there's like people who have you think about, I mean, maybe the analogy is not so precise, but, kind of Shark Tank is people who invest in companies meeting potential companies to invest in. And, oftentimes the people who are investing in companies already have like a lot of experience and kind of stories to pull on. And so they have really good judgment. I wonder if there's a parallel here where you could pluck out a few people who have like really good experience and judgment and know like what questions to ask and how to avoid the typical traps that founders may kind of wander into in kind of making their the pitches not sparkle. And if you can sort of get a founder pitching their thing, kind of the robotic showcase style, but then you have a panel of like very skeptical, very experienced talent that can like get to the heart of the, I'm imagining, people who, have, experience working at multiple tech companies and have been on interview panels and committees, and they kind of like, they know how to sort of vet and push and distill on the really important kind of ideas. And then you could have an audience of, thousands of people who are all getting the benefit of the kind of interrogation process that the experienced operators are using.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love that. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
Do you think there's people like, you mentioned Charles, like, do you think Charles would find that fun? would he be like a good, I mean, because he's been through, I think, a few different experiences like this, right?
Joining things early stage. He's actually somebody who is open to joining something early stage. You want to find people, I think, who are experienced but open to it. Not like he's not like risk averse, but he's like, is this the right risk?
Yeah.
Like,
he has like
some shot of success.
Right. He has, I think, some of the right characteristics of like the kind of the appropriate skepticism to like drive toward like, okay, what are we talking about? Let's cut the fluffy. Let's get to like, here's what I want to know. And this is really going to help me understand and decide. I feel like he has some of the right kind of instincts around that would make that super productive. So do you feel like, out of the Renaissance Collective group, do you have like half a dozen Charleses that you could put together? Because I wonder if this would be like an interesting format to just like bring in a hiring manager and do. Would it be like one at a time, or would it be the robotic showcase like 5-10 minutes each, or how do you think?
I think that we would do it. Our incentive is like, give us access to roles before they're posted. We will give you feedback on how this role lands, and we will share it if we like it. Like, if we like it, we've got a whole community of great people that you would want to get this in front of. They also all have great networks. So the incentives are pretty aligned here. Like, worst case, like the founder leaves with great feedback from talented people, feedback that they wouldn't otherwise have gotten on their pitch.
Yeah.
Best case, they would get hires.
Yeah. Totally. I want to bring Assad up to see if he had any thoughts also. I just invited him on stage.
As he was mentioning, did he attend the YC Work at a Startup?
Yeah, I connected a bunch of people from Renko with that event.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
Hey, Assad.
How are you all today?
Good. We're brainstorming about what this sort of like companies fit to / potentially. Jen was suggesting like a judge panel of people who have been through the recruiting process and like really deeply know what other people would be looking for, like Charles and Renko, for example. And since you went to YC Work at a Startup and some of these things, I just thought it'd be fun to jam if you have any ideas on like what would actually be useful from the founder perspective and also from like for people who are going to be hired perspective.
Yeah, I mean the work at a startup, the YC thing is kind of it was kind of weird because like the pitches were kind of almost useless. Like you might as well not have had them there because it was limited to 1 minute, right? So in the 1 minute, like I don't know how much they're either going to get across the one-liner that's like their version of I went to BCG and I went to Harvard and whatever. or they're going to get across, which started happening towards the end of the whatever number of pitches they had, was basically, we raised a 10 million Series A, then we raised a 15 million Series A, and it almost became a dollars as a proxy for how many roles you might have open, or how interested you are in hiring, versus like someone super early stage, which was like, hey, we only got one role open or something. So the pitches were kind of almost useless to try to just differentiate anything. After that, they had a kind of interesting one-on-one, well, no, not even one-on-one. It was like different rooms that you could drop into for each company. So like, if Renko was hiring, we had like 2 rooms maybe, and like one room would have maybe the CEO or the COO, and the other room had like a talent person. And you could drop in, ask questions, and it was like, I think up to 6 or 7 people per room. So there was a way to interact and get specific questions answered. That maybe was the most valuable part of kind of getting in front of a recruiter, like, hey, like, no shit, what are you looking for? And are you too early for this? Or are you too, is it a good fit or not? So that was probably the most helpful. The pitches were kind of useless. The descriptions were almost equally hard to decipher, because you just get this like standard go-to-market strategy. And go-to-market strategy can be anything from strategic partnerships to account executive to, cold calls perhaps. And it's like, it's really hard to be useful in any way there. That was my perspective.
And were you given like a sheet, like almost like a menu where you could read little blurbs, like a la carte explanation of each thing and kind of dive into whatever rooms you want? Or would you mostly be deciding based on the 1-minute pitch?
No, there was plenty of time to do your homework up front. I mean, if you didn't do it, that's on you. But there was like a little. I mean, the platform they used was super cool. It was actually a YC company that was hiring at the same event. Whose platform they used called Welcome, and it was super smooth, super seamless. I mean, I've seen a couple others for pitch plan competitions that I judge, and this was probably the smoothest I've seen out of the several that I used. But yeah, like there was a blurb available. There was like, hey, what they're doing, what the open roles are. But again, it was difficult because some people were like, hey, we have a don't see anything you like role, and you could like throw in a general application, and it's like, yeah, well, is that actually useful? I don't know, like where that goes and how that gets kind of sifted through. But then the other part that was a little weird was when you were in these one-on-one rooms, it was kind of free for all. So you could end up with an airway hog, and it kind of dies. And so there was very little curation there on purpose, and I think it was hit or miss depending on which room you were in.
Right. I just shared a link. I wonder if this. I'm just because we have this new feature for screen sharing, I'm going to try it out, and you can tell me if you like it or hate it. Can you see okay what I'm sharing?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. So is this roughly? So I see Welcome is the one you mentioned, yep. Right? And the tagline is create jaw-dropping virtual event. So is this roughly kind of the description that you were given to do your kind of research ahead of time? Like a little bit of a couple lines, a couple of technology things, info around the founders, and then a bunch of roles?
This was basically it for call it 20 companies.
Cool. So it sounds like basically the online content, like they've now published all that stuff online that they had sort of used as a way to structure the kind of the intros for people. And then were they, there's like a diverse set of opportunities at this one. There's like a BDR sales manager, there's a sales engineer, there's a software engineer, backend, site reliability engineer. So it feels like it could get chaotic with all the different things that they're trying to hire for. So does this event work best when you've got, half a dozen flavors of roles, or does it work with 2 people in a garage, or how do you think, is there sort of a max here?
To be pitched like pitch your highest leverage role, or like, make it specific to our audience, which is generalists, like don't pitch us your engineering roles. We're probably not going to be super helpful in providing feedback to that, but like pitch the role that's most relevant to the particular audience assembled, like we can put together technical talent for, technical roles, but like no need to like, pitch engineering roles to non-engineers, the other thing I think like that's kind of messy, like what we just saw, like it would almost be better like if the like pre-information disclosed were more like the org, like the org chart of like, here's where the potential role sits in the org, here's how we're envisioning it, so like using the org like layout, you'd be like, this role is open here and it sits within this team. Here are the 3 other members. Here's their identities, like, because that's what people care about. They're like, who am I going to be working with? Who am I reporting to? How many other people are on the team? So there's like, and like, that's on the talent to do their own homework around, and just having that laid out would just, be much easier to be like, okay, there's only 5 people here, like, or I'm the second hire that this team is making, like just more transparency around how you see that role in the org, and who are the people I'm going to be working with in a relationship, like visual way,
Right.
The org chart. Show me the org chart, not just like here's the 2 founders and like, the 1 other engineer working on this, or whatever. Like if there are 30 people, I care about the org chart even more, Yeah.
It'd pretty much just be like a URL and org chart, even if it's just like drawn out on a piece of paper, but the org chart with like everyone's Twitter links or something. And then
exactly. Because like you want to diligence who you're going to work with and who you're going to report to. Like that matters to talent. Yeah.
Do you know that startup, the org?
Yeah.
I think we talked about that before.
Yeah, we had them for an operators. You should know.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I don't think I saw that one. Who is the person?
Mishti, do you remember?
I'm forgetting his name. I can like remember his face.
Here, I'll pop.
Dylan Enright? Was it Dylan?
Yes.
There's Dylan Enright, VP of Growth. Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like this tool would almost be like maybe a perfect tool to use.
Yep.
If almost every one of these kinds of companies would be like, step 1, fill out the org, profiles. And then kind of build on top of that as a way to sort of help structure what is this and where the jobs live.
And then the, like, as we mentioned, the like couple specific problems that you would be working on, and why that's important for what the company is trying to accomplish. Because like we said, like talented people want to have impact. So even if it's not like, sell me your mission is one area of impact, and like what impact will I have in this role driving forward the org's objectives, like how will I have impact on that mission,
And when people are looking for impact, do you think that are there certain flavors or categories that speak to people? Like I can imagine some people might say, I want to have an impact on, education or climate environment stuff, or I want to just, touch a lot of end users or businesses, or, are there certain kind of categories that you've seen that people keep returning to as, how to think about impact kind of from the talent side? Because presumably that would flow through somewhat to how the pitches work from the company side.
Everybody wants to be in the part of the org that is that levers growth. So most people don't want to write copy. Or like content. Like copywriters are like that's not seen as a high leverage role. That's not going to like make or break the business in talent's mind. So everybody's like, I want product. I want to be in product, and that's because they imagine like the product has the highest leverage on what gets built and what gets shipped and what touches people's lives, So if you're trying to like hire somebody for a non-product role, you have to have a pretty compelling story about why it matters for the business and how they are going to be an integral part of what's being built and shipped.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like the growth, something tied to growth is kind of the thing that everybody's looking for. Maybe the product title is a role within kind of an org that's seen as like high leverage towards growth. But I mean, orgs obviously are made up of all kinds of different roles and people. So is the product thing kind of is it maybe most appropriate for the Renaissance Collective type of smart generalist? Are the people from Renaissance Collective who are interested more broadly outside of product? Like, are the people interested in like, I don't know, biz ops or
biz ops is really is a role that generalists get hired into all the time, and can have a big impact. But operations is another one of those like sort of fuzzy things depending on which stage and the company's at and like what's involved. I've seen everything from like glorified EA type responsibilities called operations to like we need data analytics, person who knows SQL, that's counted as operations, so but yeah, framing operations as high leverage for the growth of the business is like important if you want to get a really smart person in operations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Mishti, what were you looking for? And what motivated you?
Yeah, a lot of the things that we were touching upon, like it was a little tricky. I think so. One reason this would be super useful and a win-win for both sides is it was always tricky when I asked people who could be in mentorship positions for advice, because really like what I was looking for was just the best team possible. And you can't just say that. People always wanted like what sector or what industry or like what stage startup. And to me, that doesn't even really matter that much, because especially for people who are jumping into tech for the first time, they probably don't care so much about those details. It's just like, let me jump in with really good people.
Yes.
And if you totally don't care about the problem, then it's a no. But otherwise, like most things probably can work.
You also wanted to have impact. Like you had talked about having impact, and I just like would love to like double click on what impact meant to you.
Yeah, like for me, it was probably wanting something a little more like consumer facing or in an industry that I had outside interests in, like environment or like mobility or transportation or like government stuff. But otherwise, like impact could also just mean like more concretely seeing how the product daily touches people and like interfaces with people, as opposed to maybe like more enterprise oriented things, which still are impactful, but I just wanted a little bit more like tangibility in my own work, I think.
Yeah.
But a lot of people probably, maybe that's a bucket that makes it a lot of sense for others as well, because I think like super in the weeds enterprise versus not is like one split where people have like interest or not. And then impact in terms of like general mission, I think a lot of people are flexible on like what area a company might fall into, whether it's the environment or politics or like culture or whatever that might be. Like I think a lot of those are sort of interoperable for most people, as long as they can see some sort of through line.
Yep, totally. Like Elise joining Newfront, she felt that it was a boring industry, but the startup had impact. She was a believer in the startup's impact on the industry. And then she was a believer in, her role having an impact on how customers perceived the product and like how amenable they were to trying, Newfront.
Yeah.
So she saw impact in both ways. And she wasn't like, so driven by like, like, is this like the product that's like the most interesting, sexy product,
I think that's an interesting lesson to share, because I think, a lot of different people come to a space thinking that they, either because their background seems appropriate for a space, they want to stay in that space. So say like you came from, say you came from the sports world, you want to do something in sports, or you came from, the insurance world, you want to do something from insurance, or I don't know, the different types of backgrounds you might find. But I think a lesson that I see a lot of people sort of learn, and sometimes it's quickly or sometimes it takes a while, when coming to tech, is like the interesting thing about tech is that it's, whatever you're building is like an unsolved thing. It's like a highly unknown space that you're jumping into. And so a lot of times the like deep experience is not going to be the thing that gets you there, but it's the willingness to learn fast and figure things out and like listen to the signals. And in a sense, you could come from a sports background or an insurance background, and you could work on, like, I don't know, real estate or something, right? Like real estate tech. But it's really like core, people skills, quantitative skills, communication skills, like just like the basics of, kind of these foundational talents that can then be applied in, ways to solve really big problems for the world. And I think the Newfront thing is a great example. It's like you get here Newfront, and on the surface it sounds like, oh, insurance, like I don't know if that's really my thing. I don't see myself as an insurance person. But then you can like look at the way that the tool gets built and how it gets distributed and how that's new, and then the stories, like the people's lives that it impacts, the stories that can be told. And then that really closes the loop on what the impact is. If you're like telling those stories, it's that understanding an end kind of customer, consumer, and then sort of how that impacts their lives. And then realizing that like, if you have great talents, whether it's in, you're great quantitatively, or you're a great communicator, or you're willing to, burn the ships and take new creative approaches that are a little bit outside of the obvious, like all of those are almost like the raw materials that are needed. Like that sense of curiosity and willingness to try a new way is almost like substantially more important than the fact that you have, 5 or 10 years of experience in the, I don't know, insurance industry, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing I've heard people say a lot, and this relates to Mishti's point, is that like, I just want to join a team of winners. And we heard that with Newfront, and there are a couple other startups that people have joined lately, and they're like, I joined because like I sense that this is a team of winners, and that relates to the ambition that they see, and how people talk about the ambitions of the company.
Right. So winners is an interesting topic itself, because I feel like this has probably evolved a bit over time with like what does a winner or winning team sound like? I think it maybe used to be a little bit more just, I don't know if you want to call it something around like pure brash, aggressive movement. And I think it now actually winning sounds a little bit more like, deep understanding with great storytelling. I don't know if that distinction, I don't know if you've seen that transition yourself in things, or if you sort of would recognize that, I guess my question is, what does a winner look like in your mind, or kind of what you've seen?
Great storytelling is a big part of it. It never seems to play well when people are like, we want to build a better version of X.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like big think. Like that doesn't sound like we want to transform the world. It sounds like we want to do X that we've seen working, like incrementally better.
Right.
Whereas we want to take a really dull industry and transform this industry and disrupt it, because there's tons of room for innovation. Like when people talk about like transforming an industry and, and be like playing in the unsexy spaces, but like taking it by storm, it kind of like, it plays better in terms of like feeling like the team has ambition and like can be world changing.
So certainly kind of the startup by analogy framing is not ambitious sounding and not exciting to most anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Are there certain like patterns that maybe you've observed from how things, like what kinds of narratives or what types of storytelling techniques may tend to work well, or kind of people who really land it? Like, I don't know if you have any examples top of mind of somebody recently who you've heard a story and you're like, wow, they really nailed it. And like, what are the elements of those stories? What really makes something work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think founders' motivations for starting something always, play into storytelling. Like Adrian, when he talks about Streamlit, he talks about how he started that and it was a side project and he never expected it to be anything. And then he talks about how he was pulled into, the startup because there was so much demand for it, and all of his friends loved it so much. And, and so like when, like the idea that like, a founder didn't just want to be a founder because having the title of founder is sexy. And they didn't like go looking for the idea, like the problem kind of found them. And it was so important to them that they needed to solve this, and the deep understanding of the problem because it's made their life better, like that plays really well. The like, this is a personal problem for me and my friends and I'm solving it, like that sort of like personal connection in the founder story with the problem and the solution that plays well,
Right.
Ryan Delk has talked about how at Primer he was homeschooled and he's seen the benefits of homeschooling and he's definitely planning on, homeschooling his kids. He's a great, he has a great founder story. Josh Clement at Levels, also great founder story about, Sami at,
Virtual, yeah.
Same thing, like, has a very personal story to tell about, why he started this. And I realize that some of those are, like, these stories can be retrofitted, to be compelling, but, as much as possible, like having that, personal connection with the problem you're spending your life solving, is much more convincing.
Right. Have you seen cases where people have, I think a lot of people point to, the personal experience and sort of the problem being a direct personal experience. Have you seen any examples, or do you have any top of mind where people are solving problems that are maybe not directly for them, but somebody very close to them? So maybe it's like for a sister or brother, mother, father, grandparent, but somebody is kind of like one step removed, but like deep understanding because of a personal relationship.
Right. I feel like I've heard of this in like the digital health space. But I can't think of any.
I was thinking.
Yeah, I can't think of any top of mind, but yeah. I also feel like there's a company that works on like elderly care communities, like building communities for elders, that came from like her relationship with her grandma and realizing that her grandmother was really lonely or something like that.
Is this I thought I was going to have it top of mind and I don't. It's like a group of, it's like a kind of a group setting where you can get kind of some, I think it's like senior citizen type age people together. And actually Rashab was working with them. He told me about them and I can't think of the name now. I think it was a YC company.
Yes.
That's a good example of one that's kind of maybe one hop removed, but
the woman building it was not old, but she was inspired by a family member's needs.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, as long as they can just like be very real and genuine, I mean, I think that plays the best. So
yeah, totally. Like
what exactly the story is.
Yep. Like DK has been building communications tools for 10 plus years, like has a deep interest in it, like very interested in the problem space and has been going after it for a long time in different forms, that's very genuine and true to, who you are. So I think that comes across like, deep exploration and understanding of a problem space, not like the, like Oh, I was like, I just wanted to found something. So like we think there's a really big opportunity right here. And, we want to build something that's going to be in everybody's, pockets, like on everybody's phones. Like that just doesn't ring as true.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's also, I think you're touching on a theme or an idea that is, I think this sort of connects to that thing I was trying to get at before. So I think before there was, let's say like, I think when Bezos started Amazon, he, there's it well quoted and interviewed on this. He just saw the internet was growing at, I think he said 2,700 or 27,000% per year. And he said like, this is a really big opportunity. And so it was a very kind of, it wasn't kind of like a outsider observation. Almost you could do this as an outsider. Like, it's not like he necessarily loved books or reading or e-commerce or, I don't know. Like it felt like it was more like this is an opportunity that should be solved in the world. And so he's a little bit more of a, observer of a structure needed. And I think there's something that's in the, in the modern age, let's say, where the problems are more deeply connected to the people.
Yep.
And I don't know if that's like, I don't know if that's the right framing, but it feels like the old style almost feels like it doesn't really work anymore. And I wonder why that might be. And I mean, I don't know, take some of the big, the big successes of the day, take Elon Musk's companies, right? Like space and electric vehicles and, Boring and Neuralink and like, in a sense, like something, I think the commonality is just like, it maybe is a little more Bezosian. Do you want to say? I don't know. But it's a little bit more like this thing should be solved and we think we can get the stuff together to do it. So it's a little bit, I don't know if it's more of the old style, but it definitely works. And it certainly works well, I think, because of his storytelling ability and, a lot of the kind of networks he's assembled, both kind of capital and talent and everything. So sorry, were going to say, sorry, Jen, I just put you on the spot.
No, I think
bad, I'll take it back.
Elon's storytelling works really well because he's dreaming big. He's like he's playing in the far future, and
he's also really real.
Future, huh?
He also feels really real. Like as crazy as he is, like that almost makes him seem. It's all about just like, is this person just being genuine? He might be a nutcase, but like this is actually what he wants to do in the world. He's not like giving me some polished PR pitch about how we are revamping, like, I don't know, some industry that there's so many things that people can kind of see through and feel phony. That's also saying, if like thinking about planning an event like this, I wonder what the best, like what prompt would you give founders or companies to not make it like a very cold kind of pitch type thing, even with the right framing for the event, because you don't want people to show up and like sort of regress to the YC work at a startup.
Basically, how do you get people off script?
Yeah, like how do you just encourage them to share some of that magic and rawness?
Yeah, but I feel like there's still like, I don't know, there's still something to be said for what you find attractive for different business models. Like, the iPhone certainly wasn't the first smartphone, right? So it's not that you have to be the first to do it, or you have to be the only person doing it. And that's certainly not the case. And there was like one startup at the YC event working in like the maintenance management space, like the most boring thing on this planet. It's most likely not a problem you encounter daily. Right? Like you might, like part of their shtick was like, oh, we help apartment buildings and whatnot manage like work orders. Okay, yeah, maybe you put in a work order for your apartment once every 2 months and you hate the process and it sucks, and 2 days later you forget about it. Like it's not an imminent problem in your daily life. But that was an interesting company to me because I was like, hey, as an engineer, that's a problem that exists in almost every industrial organization. And yeah, it's pretty frustrating as an engineer. There's lots of value to be unlocked. And my interest there was, is this just another, slick talking app that raised some money and they have very little understanding of how to actually solve problems in the space or not? But that was enough to pique my interest and say, hey, I want to go look at them. Not because I think they're gonna, it's the sexiest thing on earth, but I've seen people try and fail here. So I wonder what they've got that's different.
Yeah, I think there's a whole class. It reminds me too of this whole class of problems that are a little bit in the, let's say, unsexy spaces that also are not going to have really good through lines of like personal experience. The other day we had Roger Dickey on here and he was talking about the idea shelves. Were you thinking of Roger was telling us about this idea, which sounds actually big and important, but he was mentioning how like the HOAs don't have bank accounts, and there's how many $200 billion in HOAs that get kind of collected and distributed and used for projects and tracked on ledgers. It all happens in this like haphazard way, but it's almost like hard to say like, how do you get passionate? Is it like you're a member of an HOA and it's super, super painful, or like you're going to dedicate your life to that? But it does seem like a big opportunity.
I mean, think about another space that I was talking to someone about was construction management. I've done advisory work in that space. I've judged pitches in that space. One of my syndicate groups has made an investment in that space, and it's like, that it's not a problem that imminently impacts you. That your construction foreman is lazy and he can't tell you when the lumber is arriving. Right. Your house gets constructed and then you kind of forget about all that junk. And then you worry about the next set of like $10,000 you spend on it every year to fix it. But that's a space that's completely opaque because these people manage stuff on clipboards and sticky notes, and it's a massive industry, not very sexy, doesn't really impact someone on a daily basis, but there's something about building that value out.
So do you think there's something, Asad, if somebody came to you with a pitch about, I don't know, the HOA problem or this construction industry problem or one of these, do you feel like you could get excited about it, or what would it take you to get excited about it?
Yeah, I think I could get excited about it from a different perspective, right? So you asked the question earlier around what defines impact. I think impact is hard to define, but similarly, like a lot of consultants always talk about leaving consulting because they don't do anything of value, right? Like my core product is a PowerPoint slide and it goes nowhere. And for a lot of consultants, it's like, hey, I want to get closer to building value or creating value. Well, what does that mean? Well, sometimes it really just means, hey, I want to be actually in the organization that I helped save 10 minutes of processing time an hour by revamping the process flow, whatever it is, right? And you kind of get to see the fruits of that labor. So I think there's different ways to get folks excited about that. And I think, whether it's construction management or something, I've always, as an engineer, been driven by inefficiency. Like, I hate things that are inefficient. And I'm always like, well, why hasn't someone done this better? And so things that get to that core driver, the HOA might sound super boring, or the construction industry might be equally boring. But if you think about it, those are things that are important and someone's got to solve them. It's just, the other part that also like it really attracts me to some of those problems is people have tried solving them and failed multiple times because they had no cultural understanding or appreciation for the industry they were going into. So it was like a bunch of tech bros and a bunch of finance bros got together and said, hey, we're going to go fix this industry here. And they had no appreciation for how to actually do the work. And that's also like an exciting problem set because it's like, hey, people have tried this. People who are smart by every social proof metric possible.
When you talk about sort of the people who are like disconnected and coming in different ways, kind of, it also reminded me of another question that comes up, given that you're on the hot seat right now, which is, I think you told us in a previous session that you had previously worked, you were in the Army, I believe, right?
Still am. Yep.
Still am. Okay. And then do you do a lot of recruiting in the Army? Is that like an important part of your role or a role that you've had in the past?
I've done some off the cuff kind of recruiting, but it's not a core function to me. But recruiting in and of itself is a very core function.
Right. Because I was wondering if maybe you have anything to share, because it's like you talk about sort of tech bros and finance bros in one side, and there's probably like narratives and, kind of well-trodden paths that we all understand from, or we've seen, a dozen times. Maybe they fall flat, but I wonder in the, a totally different space, just because you have this experience, in the Army, are there, certainly recruiting is important, you're saying, are there very different archetypes of people who are attracted to the Army? Are there a half dozen pitches? You kind of have to figure out which archetype to fit which pitch. Like what is the kind of storytelling? What inspires people? How do people define impact? And what sort of ends up being a good pitch to recruit somebody for the Army?
Oh, that's a fairly complex but fairly easy question. At the high school level, it could be anything from like we have these jokes about like, hey, the judge gave you an option to go to war or go to jail, so you the go to war option. Like it's the easy way out. There's that component. There's everything from getting high school kids who maybe hated where they grew up, or they've grew up in a one stoplight down in Muscatine, Iowa, or something, and they want to get out of there. That's an attractive pitch. I think the part that people underplay is the sense of community and the sense of kind of belonging you get from being there. It's like, hey, you have a set of like really cool friends for something that's it's work, but it's not work. It's like the same trade-off of, in college you make friends, and after that you kind of begin making more acquaintances and fewer friends as you go through life. So I think that's a big part of it, and it's really different. The kind of we get folks who come in for one contract, and that could be anything from, hey, I want to turn my life around, or I want to get a GI Bill and get out of here. And then you get people who stay in for life, and it could be anything from, I love being around the people I'm with. And so it's maybe that winner's concept of, hey, I love being in a high-performing organization. I love being pushed to my limits. And so those are some of the archetypes that we try appealing to. But from a recruiting perspective, honestly, the biggest struggle always is the unemployment rate. When the unemployment rate is low, it is harder for the Army to replace folks because, hey, why go listen to someone yelling at you when you can go work at, I don't know, Starbucks or Costco or whatever it is.
Right. I wonder, so a lot of the incentives are kind of the pitches that resonate in this context you're mentioning seem to be around like the people, or a better alternative than going to jail, or maybe there's ways to get college paid or something. I think is an important one. But there's also presumably a higher order mission that could be explained around sort of service to the country, for example. And I wonder, is that too far afield for the kinds of pitches, or does that come up sometimes in recruiting?
No, it does all the time. I think those are the easiest people to recruit. You don't have to sell to them. Like if someone's mission driven and like 9 generations of their family going back to the Revolutionary War or something have served, like you don't have to sell to that person. That person's coming to you to sign up on their own. But the mission driven component is pretty big. It's just that those are the easiest sells.
I see. So they kind of, in a sense, you're not selling the mission. They've come in contact with the mission through other, through family lineage or through other kind of messages in the world, and they've come already ready to be recruited in a sense.
Absolutely.
I wonder if like super crazy idea, like after that improv workshop, like getting people scripts, like having some improv style exercises to see how people story tell in, like totally off script is interesting. Like that idea, that exercise we did at the workshop on like, who would you bring to the party? How would you invite them? You had to invite one team member to this party, who would it be? Why? Or like, or give me the invite. I don't know. There's probably something in making it more playful and like, and catching people like, off guard, and then like, seeing how they think on their feet. Like, if you had to You know, like, if you had to pitch this, if you had to pitch your startup to, like, you're in an elevator with, you know, Peter Thiel or whatever, like, and you had to pitch him the startup in like 30 seconds, what would you say? Okay, now you're with your grandma.
Oh, yeah.
I always like the 5-year-old one, like explain to like a class full of like 10-year-olds that.
But it's just like making people iterate, like on the spot, like on, like, you know, how would they pitch to different audiences. There's probably a lot of signal in how they, you know, how they change their tone, you know, and how they
cool. You could start off with, like, you know, come tell us about areas that everyone wants to hear about, like what does your company do and what's the mission and whatever, and then like increasingly just get them off script until it becomes just like very real, maybe ends with like a very real raw Q&A type thing, and then
totally. Or like, you know, like you're in prison with like 5 other founders. Like, how are you going to convince the jailer out? Like that, you know, can you talk about your product and how it's going to change the world in a way that's like important enough that they spare your life? You know, you probably think of like some really ridiculous games that get at like, you know, how do you storytell around your, you know, your startup and your mission and the impact you want to have in the world, that's like creating like ridiculous scenarios that like you would never have to answer these questions in real life, so it's completely off script.
Then that almost comes back to like you have to revamp the entire format and have like I think what YC is going for is like quantity with some measure of quality in there. Like you can't have 30 pitches in the same format unless it's like a 4-hour event or something, which would like tire people out. But then I think it always circles back to, I think we had this conversation earlier as well about how do you curate, you know, how many startups, what type of startup, but then also how do you curate the types of roles. Like the one I went to was a go-to-market focused one. I think the next one coming up was general ops or something. But it's still hard to kind of really triangulate because, to your point, like, you know, a lot of them had like full stack developer roles open and also business development rep roles open. And so I think it requires a lot of effort up front in terms of preparing the panelists or the questions you ask and curating. And so there's a lot of investment needed, I think. I don't know.
Right. It almost seems like you could have every hiring manager come on and give a little bit of like their own story or their own, like, here's what we're doing this week. Here's what the team looks like. Here's the problems that we're running into. We really need somebody who's, you know, super analytical. And we've got all this incoming data, and we need somebody who's like good at SQL or something because we have this specific set of inbound problems that we're trying to solve. You know, it's where you're getting off script in a sense. Like, how do you sort of push people to be people and not like automatons, which I think most of the world, especially professional stuff, I think is mostly trying to structure things into like repeatable, scalable systems. But then we lose the humanity when we do that, when everything's like, okay, here's the dozen jobs we're hiring for, you know, a couple dozen jobs, and then they all have like an apply link and here's our mission and change the world, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, it all sounds the same, right? Mm-hmm. And I think if you can get people off script and just being real, that's the magic. So I like this idea of using lessons from improv. So we should actually get, was it Nonya who led that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We should get Nonya and ask her to brainstorm how improv games could be applied to this kind of, you know, this kind of robotic showcase like thing. How could you take like improv games and make recruiting better, make company pitching better?
Totally.
I'm a believer.
Like, it was so, like, it provided such good insight when you were part of that improv room to see how people relate to each other, to see how they listen to each other, and the yes and, you know, like, gave you some sense of like, you know, people's ability to work together well, you know. So yeah, I'm not sure, but I was actually really impressed at that improv session and how many lessons there were for like storytelling and responsiveness, and like you just learn, you get a lot of signal about people that I would not have thought from watching them perform in this way, and like participating and throwing wrenches into the process, seeing how people react to like this thing.
I think actually, Jen, you do a lot of coaching of people in Renaissance Collective around blurb writing to break out of the formats that are comfortable and they feel like the well-trained. So you do some work already to get people off script. I wonder, do you feel like that stuff, you kind of have a good process and system for that? And can you get people even further afield? And would that be helpful or useful? Because I think what you end up, like a lot of people want to like recite their resume in paragraph form, and you kind of, if I were to summarize, I think you sort of get people out of the, recitation of the resume and into like, hey, here's how I can help solve your problems, right? Like I notice you have these problems, and I actually think I can be impactful in this way, right?
Yeah.
Are there things there?
The same elements of improv, which is like observation, like you're basically showing that you can be observant and read beyond the mission line. So many people, when they come to me with their blurb, clearly copied and pasted the mission line off the website. And they will say like, hey, like, I'm excited about the fact that X is doing Y, and you're like, that is a copy of what's on their website, and that just is such an empty throwaway sentence that doesn't show you understand the problem or the opportunity, or like how you're going to provide value on the team. So I always push people to like dig into that and show that they as a person, given like their unique set of experiences, have observed that problem in the world, understand it, feel like they, can contribute to it given their experiences. Aside came to that job transition circle thing, but that's like basically what we were doing for each other, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the more of those exercises you go through with others, the better you get. And it's honestly one of those really dumb things, because like some of the advice and the input that like you gave on my blurb, I was like, oh duh, like if an MBA student from Rice had reached out to me with this blurb, I would have destroyed it and sent it back, like, and said like these 5 things. And just, like, if they're a vet, even worse. Like if they're a veteran, I would just like, yeah, absolutely, like fillet them. And I'm like, yeah, it's just sometimes really hard to take yourself out of character and go, why is it that I can, apply that lens and framework to somebody else's thing and not mine?
Yeah.
Totally. It takes the same sort of empathy that improv does, like where you're like, wait, what does this person care about most? And how do I frame what I have to offer in a way that, if I were in their shoes, they would pull this out of the pile.
It reminds me of this concept from programming called rubber duck debugging. We were talking about internally the other day. Are you familiar with this concept?
Yep.
Assad, have you seen this? Rubber duck debugging.
No, I'm about to check right now. Let's see if it works in chemical engineering.
So rubber duck, it's a general principle of basically like you get stuck on a problem and you're like, I can't find the answer. Oftentimes what happens is you go talk to a colleague and you explain the problem to your colleague, and then while you're trying to articulate your explanation, you end up shaking loose something that's stuck in your own mind, and then you realize, okay, oh wait, I'll just go back to my desk. I know the answer. And then you go do that. And your colleague's saying like, what? What did I do? So rubber duck debugging is like every programmer gets a rubber duck to sit on your desk. And whenever you get stuck, you pick up your rubber duck and you explain your problem to your rubber duck as if it's your colleague. And then you don't waste your colleague's time. Your rubber duck is happy to hear it.
That sounds pretty similar to something we do in the chemie field. It's like, you either want to be able to explain it to a class of students, and most of the time people don't understand engineering concepts well enough to actually explain it. And so that's where the issue is. And then the other part of the issue that we always try to tell engineers is like, hey, know how to do the hand calc. Like, don't just jam it into a software and have the software do, like, understand the really painful differential equations that go into the hand calc, because you have to understand where they break down when the software says error. So yeah, I like it. I'm gonna go get a rubber duck now.
Yeah, but I think you can do this too for like any writing. Like this, you talk about, you get this. Did you say like an MBA from Rice sends you their cover letter and you just like rip it to pieces? But then if you do your own cover letter, you don't take the same. I almost wonder if you could like take your cover letter as you would write it, submit it to the rubber duck, and then get the rubber duck's feedback on it. Like maybe just create enough distance from yourself that you're like trying to persuade the rubber duck that this is actually good.
or have some way to like email it to yourself through a rubber duck email account, and it like it comes in and it masks your name, and you're like, oh look, this is a new one, and it comes a few days later, so you forget about it. Like, oh look, someone sent me.
Right. Yeah, maybe that's the actual analogy, is like send it to yourself delayed via email with a little bit of obfuscation so that you don't instantly recognize it as your own. And then when you start like tearing it to shreds, you're like, oh, actually these are things I should improve.
Well, I mean, it also makes it super painfully obvious when you read everybody else's. So the way we did it was we had everybody paste their blurb into a Google Doc, and it makes it really obvious what patterns are repeated. You're like, oh man, everybody's doing the same thing here. Like I'm really not differentiating myself by doing the same thing that is in everybody's blurb.
Right.
So that's another like helpful thing about the like building in public concept, or the semi-public.
Right. Have you blogged about this with Renaissance Collective? Because it seems like this kind of, I think there's been some blurb writing stuff that's been publicly shared.
Have we? Yeah, we've blogged about blurb writing.
Okay. And is it like a thing you reference and then people get it from there, or do people still need like additional coaching? Or
I mean, like to Asad's point, I think it's really hard to be critical of yourself. But yeah, people have said that our blog piece on this is super, super helpful. Asad, did you read it before?
Yeah, I did. So I read the blog. I read your little Twitter thing with like sentence 1, sentence 2. A couple other things that I've seen. I think I'm going to anchor to a consulting example, but the consulting is known for these really crappy case interviews, and you have to you have to prepare, and it's like this like weird dance, and you have to do the motions of the consulting case interview in order to do well. And when you start learning for it and preparing for it, it's very painful. But the way we like tell students to prepare for it is like, hey, don't come talk to a current consultant as your first step. Like, first, do it amongst yourselves. It'll be the blind leading the blind. It'll be really painful and really weird. But you have to go through, like, there's a progression. Like, you go through like 5 or 6 of those cases. Then you do a live case with someone who's like an intern or who's interned at the consulting firm and they've got a little bit of experience. And then you build your way up to like, okay, now I'm going to go do a live case with someone who's currently at the firm, and then I'm going to get much better. And I think it's kind of this similar thing where, it's painfully learned that you kind of have to maybe do it, the blind leading the blind, and the one eye leads the blind, and then everybody gets one eye, and then everybody gets two eyes eventually. And I don't know how, I think that progression just has to happen through the work, and not necessarily because I read Jen's blog or because I read Jen's Twitter.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well,
this it sounds like we have a lot of ideas for how we can improve the recruiting process, and I think we kind of were starting around this idea of the the demilitarized zone that a community like Renaissance Collective can create to help kind of broker feedback and relationships between companies and talent to help sort of improve the process on both sides. So I think I'm excited to see what we can get out of that if Renaissance Collective can help become a hub to help people flow feedback better. I think it's going to be better for companies, it's going to be better for talent, sort of lift the whole market up.
Yeah, I also like this idea of getting people out of, like getting companies and founders out of their comfort zone, or like out of off script, and being real with people, and like, talented people being able to like see how founders like really interact and listen and respond, and how creative they are. And like, I think that there's something in this like idea of an improv like style game, or games like that help get like great talent get some visibility into how founder plays with ideas and storytells and responds, and
also gives people more touch, like to our conversations earlier about how networking is really about getting to know people as people, and like their interests outside of work and stuff. The more touch points you can give Renko members or whoever's on the recruit side to what are the human aspects of these people, it'll just become so much easier for them to write like really nice emails afterwards and stuff, or like reach out to them a month later when something relevant comes up about a book they mentioned or whatever. I think the more of those you can bring out in these sessions, like the more connections will end up being created afterwards.
For sure. And what really matters in relationship building after events is how people leave the event feeling. If people leave feeling like they mattered and they were listened to, and they got unique access to some piece of information or something like that, they leave, or they laughed together at the event. Right. They leave feeling like this was worthwhile, and that this is a person they want to continue investing more time and energy to get to know. So like people don't talk about it a lot, but it's like really about the feeling that people leave with. It's like a good dinner party. What you remember is like how warm it felt, like how how great the conversation was, how like you felt heard and understood, and and that human element of like how you felt in your interaction is like so important, not only in like hiring, but anything you can do when you have a touch point with a talented person. So it matters.
Yeah, I'd love to see the recruiting process get more just people being real and talking about it. So I think there's a good direction to explore there.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Good. Yeah, thanks for coming by. This has been a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of interesting new directions to explore on stuff. So I hope that we can get you and Renko people back, and we can chat more about these topics as you guys make progress on your thinking.
Sounds fun. All right. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.